To replace the front shock absorbers on my 2003 Clio, I've just jacked the car up in the air. The first thing to do, jack the car up, support it securely on axle stands if you're going to be doing any work under the vehicle of any kind. So I've jacked it there on the subframe, and the axle stands are using the sill supports there. And I've got that process repeated on that side there. The axle stand is in the same place on the other sill support, and I use the same subframe jacking point to do that. Take the wheels off it, and I also like to chock the rear wheels as well. This driveway is on a slight slope and the handbrake's on firmly, and I've chopped the rear wheels as well with logs just to be sure that the car doesn't move anywhere. To remove the shock absorber on these cars, there is two large bolts here. You need to remove the nuts there. I'll be removing this ABS wire from the side. Those are the only items that hold it on at the bottom at the hub end, and of course in the engine bay we need to release this top nut here, which I'll need to counter hold with this hex bit. I'll show you that in due course. And the other side is the same. I'm doing both, of course. You should be doing both. If you're replacing any of them, they should be done in pairs. So this is the same side. Spray some WD-40 or something, some penetrating oil on these bolts. It's probably worth it. They're exposed to lots of grime on the road, and it's worth trying to give yourself the best advantage you can. So I've just removed this. This just pulls out of that clip there. Just wiggle it gently and pull it free. That's all you need to do. I've let the WD-40 sit for a short while just to try and loosen these bolts a little bit. I'm using a breaker bar first. My impact gun is probably not really powerful enough to do these on its own, so I'm just going to break these loose firstly with a breaker bar. And the bolt hasn't spun, that's good. Okay, the bolt's spinning now, that's fine. I knew I'd have to counter hold it. So these are 18mm bolts, just an 18mm ring spanner on the other side, and hopefully this should now pull it off. Of course you don't need to use an impact gun for this, just ordinary hand tools will work fine, a ratchet, spanners. Okay, that's the other side broken free. It's probably a bit of a fight for these because they're quite rusted, but hopefully the penetrating oil helped a little bit. So now that's free at the bottom end. I can wiggle that loose once I remove these bolts. Now don't let the hub assembly fall away too much. You don't want the drive shaft coming loose from the gearbox there because you have gearbox oil everywhere, and on some CV joints, I don't know if these are these ones, you can separate the joint internally, which can be a bit of a ball ache to put back. So just don't make sure this doesn't flop too far forward. Maybe support it with something up here if it needs it. This one is now free, and as long as it's moving like that and it's not flopping outwards, I don't mind. So that can stay there. Take care not to strain the brake line going to the caliper, but that's going to be fine now. I'll be going up top in a moment and releasing the nut from the top there, and then pulling the strut away from the car. The strut's now removed from the car. I've removed this fastener at the top. It was a case of counter holding it, this piece here. It was a 21mm on that one, and then counter holding with a hex bit. I forget the size of that one, but you'll find it in your set. It was maybe 6 or 7mm. Hang on a minute, I'll find out for you. Okay, it was a 6mm, that one. I did use an impact gun in fact on this, and it made it a lot easier just to quickly remove it, but if you don't have that, just use a deep sort of ring spanner here like these, and something to counter hold it, and you'll be able to remove that nut. That nut doesn't hold the entire strut together, so don't worry about the spring releasing when you do that. This is just to keep it up in the top part of the car. Once you've done that, the strut will sort of move down, so catch it and make sure it doesn't snag on any of these lines and pull on these. Just take it away from the car. And now after that, you're going to need to do something incredibly dangerous. And there's numerous videos all over YouTube of people using spring compressors like this, DIY spring compressors, and the spring compressors moving on the spring, or something going wrong, and there's an awful lot of energy stored in these car springs, and when they release, things go flying up there somewhere, so maybe expect a shattered light if this goes wrong for us. But I'm now going to be tightening these down. I've got 3 on here in total, There's two here and one at the side. That was one of my earlier spring compressors with just two hooks on it, which aren't very good. These later ones have got two each on each end, which is slightly better, but even so, this isn't a brilliant process. But put these on evenly around them. Make sure they don't walk left or right as you tighten them. Tighten them all in stages, little bit by little bit, all around them, and only enough just so that this top area here, there's the bearing, steering bearing, just make sure that's loose when it's slack. That's all you need to do, no further. The more you compress this, the more dangerous it is. When it is slack, we'll need to be undoing this nut at the top. That does hold the spring pressure on, so that's the one we need to undo when the spring is slack. That is a 17mm, and I've got a deep socket for that one. You'll need a deep socket, or just a ring spanner even, if you want to, or an open-ended spanner to get that off. But you need a deep socket if you want one to fit over this here. So I'm going to have a go at winding this up now, and hopefully I won't die. This is what you need to be careful of. That one there is becoming slightly loose on this lower side. I need to make sure it doesn't walk off the spring. It's quite scary doing this. If you have a garage local to you that's got the proper wall-mounted hydraulic ones, it would be better to ask them politely if they wouldn't mind doing this for you. Because this isn't brilliant, doing it like this. As I said, search YouTube for these spring compressors failing and you'll see what I mean. They're like a hand grenade when they go off. Not brilliant. We've had to reposition these spring compressors. It turns out that these are later ones that I bought, and I bought them because they've got two hooks, so I have found them to be more stable than these single hook ones. But on this coil spring, it's a very low number of turns, only 3 or 4 sort of turns in between it. Quite a coarse coil spring, I suppose you'd say. These didn't work so well on this. They were a bit scary, to be honest. They were walking off fairly easily. These older ones I've had, which normally I didn't trust quite so well because they can walk off quite easily around there, but they've worked better in this instance. Maybe it's the case that these work better for coarse springs with only a few turns. I've used these with success with more fine springs on cars with multiple turns between the bottom and the top. Regardless, it was getting pretty bloody scary before, so I've had to loosen it a fair bit and change the position of these things. I've now got them 180 degrees opposite to each other. They're both hooked in well, they're not walking, and they're in at 90 degrees, they're not walking around. This one's on the side as well. It's not doing a huge amount, but it is at least an extra piece of safety. And finally, we've now got the top, which is just coming loose now, so I'm able to start undoing this 17mm nut at the top here. All the time we're doing this, this is essentially a bomb ready to go off, so be really gentle with it. I'll be removing this in a minute, but put it somewhere out of your way once you take it off. It's just a complete bomb until you release these fully when the new strut has been built up. Not very nice doing this, but I haven't got access to a proper compressor. So I'm going to have a go at taking off this nut now. Again, I'm using my impact because it will hopefully stop the strut piston spinning. If it does spin and you've only got hand tools, you need to counter hold it again with that, I think it was 6, I forget what I said now, a 6mm hex key at the top there. So I'm just going to have a go at undoing this one now. And yes, I am using chrome sockets with an impact, I apologise. This thing is pretty weak though, so I'm not too worried about it, and you shouldn't do this at home. Right, that looks like it's working. So clearly we have all the pressure off the strut because that just did not fly up and hit us all in the face. So there's the top mount, and there's a spacer hat for it. That should still be the original Renault one. I have replaced that one on the other side. This one is still in good condition, so that's absolutely fine. There's the bearing, steering bearing, and I tried this earlier on, despite possible appearances, it is still fully functional and not graty. It's smooth in its operation. I've got no clunks coming from the suspension, so I'm leaving that. I don't intend to change that. There's the upper spring seat, quite crusty obviously, but it doesn't really affect it. I'm not bothered about that. It's just a piece of steel. I'll probably go over it with a wire brush just to get some of the crap off it, but it doesn't really matter. When reassembling, and I will show this, you need the end of the spring there to locate against that stop there, and it will coil in that direction. You must have that locating up against there. So now you can see the order. It was this first, then that, and then the upper bushing that goes on top of it, and then the little nut, which is a very small, quite a thin nut. That one just holds everything together. This is the nut that holds all the spring tension on. So this is the one you've got to be careful removing. Make sure you've got the spring compressed before you attempt to remove this, otherwise it won't end well for you. Then we can lift the spring away now. To show the difference in the old versus new shock absorbers, that's the original shock absorber, the first one I've removed so far. Bit of corrosion down there, probably not brilliant, but not necessarily anything to give it away. But this one is very easy to push down when I push it down in a moment. Yeah, easy to push down, and it's not coming back up again like it should. And here's the new one, which is already at the top because it stays at the top. If I push it down, it's much firmer to push down and slowly retracts to the top again, just to show the difference between the old and the new. So hopefully when both of these two new front ones are installed on the car, it should feel a little bit different to drive and nicer. The spring's now been removed. I've just lifted it off the strut. I've put it somewhere a long way away because it's still compressed. Below it was this rubber spring seat. I might give that a bit of a clean. That's just the lower portion of the old strut there. This is the bump stop. You will need to transfer this over to your new strut. Here's my new strut, which I'll be loading into the device in a moment. There's the bump stop, and there's a dust shield again at the bottom of it, similar to the rear shock absorbers. So that can just be transferred over to the new strut. Go down like that. And this one will be too. The thing to look out for on these struts, this rear lower spring seat, the rubber seat, there's a little groove in it there, this protrusion, which needs to go into that notch there. You just must make sure that's seated correctly, because that will determine where the end of the lower part of the spring goes. The lower part of the spring, similar to the upper one, needs to seat into that gap there against the end, the stop. So when you position this, that has to be correct with this, and when you put the spring in it, make sure that the end of the spring goes up against that stop. That means it's seated correctly. So put that in there now. There. Like that. We'll get the old one out of the vise. One-handed. Clamp the new one in. Be fairly gentle when you clamp these in the vise. We don't want to ruin the new shock absorber. It doesn't need to be particularly tight, just hold it so it's sturdy. That's fine. So that's on, that's on. The next thing to do is going to be put the spring bomb back on it, and then put the top assembly back on after that, and I'll go and grab the spring now. I've just put the spring back on the new strut. I've made sure that the end of the spring is located in the bottom rubber housing. I've just added the top assembly, which, as I said before, is in this order. So there's the upper spring seat, and there's the end of it. I've just given it a quick clean. There's the end of the spring, which needs to locate up there, just like that there. Next part is the bearing. That's on. Then the rubber bushing, and don't drop the top hat part. That goes on inside there, and then this thin nut, which goes on the top. Now that that's been screwed down slightly, there's no danger if these were to let go of anything popping off towards the roof, because the nut is on there. That's the retaining nut. So the next job now is to remove the compressors and relieve the tension on the spring. And as you're doing this, make sure that the spring end doesn't move or start walking away from the seat here. You want to keep both of them in the same place. The strut's now back in the car. I've just offered it up. It's the reverse of removal. At the top end, I just had to push it up there to locate it and put the original top cap back on. Just a few turns for the moment, just to hold it in position. So down here, I've just put the 2 bolts back through in the same way. They go from front to back, the bolts. This is the front of the car here, obviously, and they go this way. I'm just going to run them down quickly with the impact, and then I'll torque them up. They are 105 Newton meters. There's one. And there's 2. So those are now secure. The only other thing I need to do is transfer the small bracket that was on the old strut onto this new one, so that we can secure the ABS cable here. It was a T30 bit, and I'm going to go and do that in a moment, and then just put it back onto this one here so you can secure that. And then also now I'll be tightening up the top as well. The shock absorber on the other side, the driver's side, has now been completed. I didn't bother filming the process because it's exactly the same as the other side. Tighten down the bottom bolts and tighten up the top bolt there. Everything's secure. So this is the job complete now. The car can be lowered back down to the ground, put the wheel bolts on, and go for a test drive. Make sure that nothing's making any noises, no clonks or knocks or anything like that, and make sure that the shock absorbers are working well. That's the entire video. Thanks very much for watching.